Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, dear friends. As chairman of the board of the Sergio Vieira de Mello Foundation, and on behalf of Director Burin of the Graduate Institute of International and Development Studies, partners for our annual conference, I wish you all a very warm welcome in this beautiful Ivan Pictet auditorium. I would like to acknowledge in particular the presence of the Deputy Secretary General of the United Nations, Mrs. Amina Mohammed, and the Director General of the UN in Geneva, Mr. Michael Melo. The 15th of March, just a few days back, was Sergio's birthday. He would have turned 70 if he hadn't been killed along with 21 colleagues in a terrorist attack against the UN headquarters in Baghdad on the 19th of August 2003. This August marks the 15th sad anniversary of this tragic event. His passionate goal was to bring about dialogue and reconciliation between parties in conflict. With so many war-torn countries in the world today, we realize more than ever how much Sergio is missing from the scene. He, who with his intelligence, vibrant personality, and acute vision, managed to get sworn enemies around the same table to work out a solution to their problems. In memory of Sergio, but also to promote the values he represented and to continue his mission, the Sergio Vieira de Mello Foundation was founded by a group of his family and friends. Every year we organize a high-level lecture in cooperation with the Graduate Institute and the United Nations office at Geneva. Every other year we award a prize to an individual, institution, or community in recognition of their outstanding and unique work for peaceful reconciliation between peoples and parties in conflict. The award ceremony takes place during the celebration of the celebration of the World Humanitarian Day on 19th of August. This day was established by a UN General Assembly resolution following an initiative by our foundation. Tonight, we are privileged to have with us two eminent persons in their respective fields. Our guest speaker is Staffan de Mistura. For over 40 years, he worked in various capacities with several UN agencies in Africa and the Middle East. Like Sergio, you could always find Staffan de Mistura in the most difficult places in the world where people were most hurting. In 2007, he was appointed Special Representative of the Secretary General for Iraq, the job that Sergio briefly held in 2003 and which he gave his life for. In 2010, Mr. de Mistura became the top UN envoy to Afghanistan. From 2011 to 2013, he served as Undersecretary of State for Foreign Affairs in the Italian government. But then in 2014, he returned to multilateral diplomacy when he was appointed to his current position of Special Envoy of the United Nations Secretary General, tasked with seeking a peaceful resolution of the conflict in Syria. Hence, Mr. de Mistura has wide experience in the many conflicts which have plagued the Middle East, Afghanistan, and other areas in the world. As you can well imagine, Sergio and Staffan's paths often crossed. They became friends And we are particularly pleased that Staffan is our speaker at our 10th lecture in the 15th anniversary year of Sergio's death. Our moderator this evening is Miss Sophie Shevardnadze, an international TV and radio journalist, op-ed writer and interviewer. A public figure in Europe and Russia, she moderates various panels and public talks around the world and is just back from taking part in panel discussions at Harvard and Yale on international relations. She has her own signature interview show, Sofiko, on Russia's English language network channel RT, where she has interviewed many eminent persons in the news. Born into a political family, she is a granddaughter of the last foreign minister of the Soviet Union and later president of Georgia, Edward Shevardnadze. Sophie was raised and educated between Tbilisi, Paris, and New York. She earned her BA at Emerson College and her MA from New York University in broadcast journalism and is fluent in 5 languages. We are very pleased to welcome you here, Sophie. As in all our previous events, there will be a question and answer session. In line with Sergio's love of teaching and communicating with young academics, questions from students will be given priority. Creativity, a new tool for international diplomacy. New tools are badly needed to solve the many problems in the world. Staffan, we are looking forward to hear your views on this, and the floor is yours.
Thank you so much for your kind words in introduction to both of us. I feel honored. I feel honored because it's true, I was and am a friend of Sergio, but also I was an admirer of Sergio. We did work together in several missions, and in every occasion I was looking at him and trying to learn from him. He was 1 year younger than me, but he had such a unique capacity of conveying messages in a way that people could not resist saying yes. And that is certainly one of the qualities of a good negotiator. He did it with charm. He did it with determination. So I've been thinking, and since there are so many young people here, and you know, many, 1, 2, 3, 10 of you could be the next Sergio. We need them in the UN. We need a new generation. Instead of making a relatively academic type of intervention, I would like to ask myself a question. What would have Sergio done in this type of what we would call super complex type of emergency, which is the one of Syria? You have everything in it. And when people ask me what has been the most difficult mission you have been involved with, well, I would normally say the last one. And in this case, it's definitely the last one, because I can't imagine anything more complicated than what we are facing at the moment. What would have Sergio done? And in that context, I've been thinking about perhaps answering by using an anecdote. So bear with me. I know you're interested, and so am I, naturally, day and night on Syria, but I will divert a little bit, and it may be even appearing light as an anecdote, but then the message will be one that I'm trying to follow, and I think Sergio, if he was here, he would have followed very actively indeed. So the anecdote is the following. I'm going back in time because I'm able to talk very openly about old things, not about current things. I'm still very active, as you know, so I can't write a book of history yet. So fly back. In the 80s, and come to a country which is called Sudan. And at that time, it was a very difficult moment because there was a city called Juba which was besieged. And that city was besieged because they were fighting for their own independence. The country then became independent. And the city was being besieged by the opposition. Inside the city, there was a garrison and many people. The garrison was well fed. Have you ever met a military or a fighter hungry? I've not seen any in my life. Normally, civilians. The fighters find a way, and the soldiers do find a way to nourish themselves. So the garrison was well nourished. The city and the people were close to starving. So we decided to actually try to break that siege. And the way to do it was to have an airplane and flying in food. The problem was that the opposition had anti-aircraft. And there was, at that time, the top of it, SAM 7, they used to be called. They had already shot down a plane, which, because they had heat-seeking type of capacity, so the government decided not to do anything, not to fly. So we challenged that creativity. And we said, why can't the UN try to do it? So we made an appeal, and 7 countries contributed to actually fund that project. And we were able to call it Operation Rainbow. Each country had a color, contributed. The plane was an old but effective C-130, and the country who provided it had not read on the newspapers, there was no internet yet, that there had been another plane shot down through the SAM-7s, which was obviously good news. The bad news was that the government was very annoyed, because they felt that we were doing what they were not ready to do. So suddenly, I was in trouble. The government was angry and almost indicating if you push too hard, PNG'd. The rebels, John Garang, had threatened to shoot us down and was very angry and was saying it publicly on the BBC. The UN headquarters were not happy, because at that time we were not yet in the period where you had the droit d'ingérence humanitaire. You were disturbing a government by insisting in doing what the government had not been done and was not doing. Plus I had amoeba, and my fiancée had written to me a letter saying, it's over, you have been staying too long and you're never coming back, you're married to your missions. So I was on my own, in my office, 7 o'clock in the evening. I remember still looking at my desk and a map, and suddenly I see a small lady showing up, pretty small actually, followed by another lady, a little bit taller, but not much. And she says, I'm Mother Teresa, and what is the problem? So I look at her. First, I never met Mother Teresa in my life. Secondly, I couldn't believe she was in Khartoum in my office. She said, well, I'm here, and rather abruptly, actually. And can you explain the situation? Because I was yesterday in Castel Gandolfo with the Pope, and His Holiness had listened on the BBC that some young people of the UN, I said, thank you for the young, I was already 40, and were trying to actually organize an airlift to a besieged city of Juba, and there were problems. I said, yes, big problems. Well, can you explain it to me? So I took a map, started explaining and showing, well, here is this, and this is part of East-West fighting, and you know, the North and the South, and the Arabs, and the Soviet Union, and the Americans, and so on. Too complicated, she said. Too complicated. Just get it solved. I said, well, get me to talk to John Garang. I said, but he's in the jungle. He's a fighter, and he doesn't want to talk to me. Actually wants to shoot me down. Well, then let's talk to the president of Sudan, Sadiq al-Mahdi, who obviously was the biggest problem to me because he was not allowing even the plane to take off. My idea and my gamble was, we take off, We are not that naive, so we'll try to avoid it. We'll challenge the plane, the fighters to shoot down the plane, which was bringing aid to their own people in Juba, and perhaps they will not do that. But the government was saying, you can't fly. So she says, no problem. Let's call Sadiq al-Mahdi. I said, he's not there. He's in the States, visiting, official visit to the President Reagan. Ronald, no problem. And Nancy is such a nice lady, and she has been so attentive. I said, well, I know, but here I am. No, call him in rather firm instruction. Call him. At that time, no telephones, mobile phones. It was only basically a radio, you know. And through the radio, you connect to Zurich, Switzerland, thank you, and then from there into the airwaves, you know, normal telephones. So I go through the connection, go into Zurich, and then ask the White House at the switchboard. Yes? I said, my name is Staffan de Mistura. I work for the World Food Program of the UN. Yeah. And I've got here Mother Teresa of Calcutta, who wants to talk to President Reagan. Today, we got a call from Napoleon, now one from Julius Caesar, and now Mother Teresa of Calcutta, who calls from Khartoum. I said, well, she travels, you know. And sorry, we have no time for that. I said, please give me at least the desk officer. So the desk officer comes on the line, and he says, yes, we have no much time. What is your problem? I said, I'm not sure it's my problem. Mother Teresa of Calcutta wants to talk to President Reagan. Listen, we have no time to lose. Tell me, when, what time, what hour, what place Mother Teresa of Calcutta met for the first time President Reagan. The other sister, called Sister Mirtilla, I will never forget her, had a big dream book and started looking quickly on it, and 15th of February in Washington on the occasion. So I said 15th of February at 5:45, and on the occasion of the visit to a church where they had a community. Suddenly the tone changes. He calls me for the first time, sir. Sir, very good. Now you tell me what is the last occasion where President Reagan, and particularly Madame Nancy Reagan, met Mother Teresa. Again, Mirtilla, very efficiently. It was in New York, actually. Again, for the opening of a special center for the terminally ill people. That's the time when the whole atmosphere changes. And the message was, the president will call in 1 hour exactly at the U.S. Embassy. So Mother Teresa said, what do we do? I said, we'll go to the U.S. Embassy immediately. So she gets in my little Peugeot, WFP marked. I have the picture which is now exhibited in WFP headquarters with Mother Teresa sitting with me on the side and Mirtilla in the back. And then get to the embassy. Closed, 7:30. Where is the ambassador? Ambassador is at the National Day cocktail party of a country. It was, I think, Czech Republic, I think. Also. So I rush with Mother Teresa always in the car, go to the embassy in the cocktail, and rush to the ambassador, who is called George, and said, George, I think in about 43 minutes, President Reagan will call you. Staffan, you know, I don't know whether they told you in Sudan, when I left, they told me to drink a lot of water and put normally salt, because with the heat, you get the first reaction is some hallucination, then you get some cramps, and after the cramps, you get total paralysis, and you need to do. So I said, I think you may have a need of salt and water. Please follow me, and I will show you. I brought him to Mother Teresa, who was getting more and more impatient in the car, quite impatient, actually, even with the fingers on. And he almost has a heart attack. So we all rush to the embassy. Everybody is there, the Marines, the wife of the ambassador. The ambassador probably had never been able to talk to the president very often. He must have been nominated. You know, Khartoum is not really Moscow or Paris. So he was all waiting in front of the telephone, all of us, including the Marines. And Mother Teresa says, now it's time to pray. So everybody, so everybody with the rosary, I mean she was saying Ave Maria and so on, and or everybody pretending or not, but doing it. Until finally the phone rings, she picks it up and says, well, we have got this group of young people who are trying to get to Juba, and can you do something? This is unacceptable. Can you talk to President Sadiq al-Mahdi, and so on. Bottom line, thank you. Can you send a telex for just confirming? Very businesslike. And then we all ask, what happened? And Mother Teresa said, well, President Reagan said that Sadiq al-Mahdi had sadly already left. But she would send the vice president, which I think was George Bush Sr., to New York, because that's where he is, to convince him to allow this plane to leave. And sure enough, that happened. And the plane, of course, the government said, never in life we had ever even tried or thought to stop the plane. Of course, the UN should be allowed to actually go to Juba. How can we say no? And John Garang, we did announce that Mother Teresa had been there. So John Garang got a little bit also worried about shooting down a plane where perhaps Mother Teresa would have been. Then we actually took 2 planes with World Food Programme. One is a decoy, because we are nice but not stupid. And the decoy that was flying high, so at midday, hottest moment, so that the SAM-7 would heat-seeking finally be difficult, was flying high. And we, with a smaller plane, DC-9, full of food, landed at low intensity, flying very low, to Juba. And Juba was never again besieged. Now, message. The message is, and this the message where I think I would like to look at my notes, because there is a message which has an impact on Syria too. The message that Mother Teresa gave me, and I think Sergio applied many times in his life, is first of all, the truth. The truth needs to be simple, and the truth needs to be said. And the truth needs to be said politely, probably, but said. Second, the priority are the people. Forget all the political reasons why it's north, south, east, west, the people. Can we do? Should we do? Why not? And 3, you don't give up. You become creative. You find a new formula. If the plane cannot fly, you find another way. If you can't have 1 plane, you do 2. If you can't do that, you use another method, but you don't give up. So, let's go back to Syria, and then... So I think, since I didn't want to talk too much about Syria, although it has been, and it is, constantly in the front of my eyes, my nights, of my colleagues, and of the Secretary General, I can tell you. I've been with him on the phone several times in the last 48 hours. But I still think that by picking up from the message of Mother Teresa, I would like to tell you what I believe at this stage is the truth on Syria. The truth is that there is no military solution. I know we're hearing it, and what we are watching is military activities while we are talking. But there is no military solution. Because even if there will be, and there seems to be, territorial victories, what is going to be missed is winning peace. In other words, finding a solution that will actually make the country in peace. Second, the truth is that without a governance based on a new constitution and presidential and parliamentary elections, there will be no stability, and therefore many countries, those who can afford it, I heard it today again, will not contribute to reconstruction. And without reconstruction, it will be a tragedy in Syria. The truth is that without an inclusive political process, including those who are excluded, particularly the majority, the Sunnis, Daesh will come back. That's what happened in Mosul, that's what happened in Iraq, and we should have learned that lesson. And therefore we need a format, not only about a military victory, which some may be hoping to get, but actually a fully inclusive formula by which everyone, particularly majority, will be part of this. Otherwise, believe me, sadly, you will see a new Daesh with a new name. The truth is that a soft, long-term partition of Syria, which the one we are witnessing at the moment in different areas of control, will be a catastrophe, not only for Syria, but for the whole region. And the truth is that in spite of the fact that the Security Council often, sadly, is divided on Syria, the Secretary General, the UN Secretariat, the UN agencies, myself, will never abandon the Syrians. Thank you.
Mr. de Mistura, thank you very much for this wonderful talk. My name is Sophie. I would like to say a few words on my behalf, if you don't mind. First of all, thank you. Welcome. I'm very honored and I'm very happy to be part of this event. I would like to thank Sergio's family, the foundation, the Graduate Institute, United Nations office at Geneva. We're also here to pay homage to the UN staff, the best, the brightest who perished along with Sergio in Iraq, to honor their families, their loved ones. I do not know Sergio personally, but what I know is that only an incredible human being, a relentless humanitarian, devoted humanitarian, could have lived a life that he did, to live a legacy that endures like this, even after his departure. You know, as for today, many would argue that diplomacy in its conventional understanding is at a dead end. It's not able to solve the many issues that the world is facing. You know, Sergio was a relentless negotiator. He never shied away from any opportunity that diplomacy presented, even if that opportunity didn't necessarily fit the norms or conventions as we understand them. So I think that is why his cause today is more relevant than ever. It takes upon a new meaning. It's easy, especially when you work in the media, to dismiss diplomacy, because the process of diplomacy is not something that makes headlines immediately. I mean, it's just people talking to each other, right? But, you know, I say this with conviction because I also come from a family of a great diplomat. I vividly remember diplomacy in the making, and I know for a fact that diplomacy can literally make the world a better place. And I just love Stephen Hawking, and he famously said once that mankind's greatest achievements have come about to talking, and all the failures are from not talking. So I think it's only fitting and timely to be having this discussion with you, Mr. de Mistura, because you have also devoted all your life, energy, your strengths to the goal of peace. You are a brand name, everyone knows you, right now mostly because of what you're doing in Syria. But once again, because of media's short attention span, maybe not everyone remembers the breadth of your diplomatic experience, at the wide geography of your field engagement. Therefore, I think there is no other person that could be best qualified than you to talk about creativity in diplomacy right now. So if you allow me, I'm going to tap into the wealth of your experience and talk about not only about what you're currently involved in, but what global challenges diplomacy faces nowadays. I would engage the audience and try to maximize this interaction. So I thought I would break up this panel into a few base points, start asking you questions, and then engage you. You know, questions to be precise and straight to the point, please. And then we'll take it from there, okay? Because your questions are paramount to this event. So I'd like to start by asking, except from the Syria case and the Sudan case, recent cases, there's so many of them. What do you think is the best example of creative diplomacy?
I'm thinking because I believe that many of the creative examples of diplomacy will never be known, or will be known many years afterwards. They are the ones where the UN and others were able to actually put together people who hate each other, who cannot be seen talking to each other, or that they require an alibi in order to be able to actually make a compromise. And some of those are still current in my current mission. So I will have to reply to you only with a old story again, because I'm sorry, I'm still operational. Yeah. And that means we don't reveal our tactics, because they can be still useful. And sometimes I wanted to be a fireman when I was a kid. It didn't really look very logical. So then I decided I wanted to be a medical doctor. And my father convinced me that a medical doctor speaks 7 languages. It's better he becomes a doctor for countries. At least you could also be a very rich doctor, but still. And that's why I look at it from a medical point of view in a way. And we had a moment many years ago when there was a lot of proxy war taking place between East and West in Angola, in Mozambique, and Ethiopia, Somalia, and elsewhere. And there, one of the creative techniques that were used was vaccinations, believe it or not. Vaccinations. By approaching people and starting saying on both sides, don't you have children, for God's sake? Yes, we do. Can't we then have an opportunity of vaccinating them for 3 days? So the only shots will be the shots in the arms of the children, but not in the air. And by doing so, obtaining 3-4 days when now nobody will fight, and through that give them an alibi to show that you can stop fighting. And by doing so, getting the human touch, the human opportunity. Well, it worked. It worked in Central America and other places. So you could ask me, Mr. Mistura, why don't you vaccinate in Syria? No? Because the doctor has to know that when you have antibiotics, there is a resistance which is built in microbes too. So the bad guys, or the guys who want to continue fighting, say, just a moment, you're using the famous technique of vaccination. Don't even mention it to me. We already saw what happened. Bad news. The other guys were obliged to negotiate. We want to win the war. We are stronger. And we will just do the vaccination on our own. Bottom line, new techniques, new approaches. The conclusion is, whatever we can do in facilitating a dialogue between people who have decided to hate each other, that's where diplomacy becomes most effective and where the UN can do it, because we talk to everyone, or at least we are allowed to talk to everyone.
Well, that brings me to my next question, and since you don't want to talk about recent cases, I'll ask you about a case that you're not involved with, but you can tell me your thoughts. Everyone's thinking about the possible upcoming meeting between the United States and North Korea. And the way it happened, the way it all came together was pretty unconventional, I would say. I mean, some would argue you could look at it medically or with vaccination approach. But do you feel like whatever is going on right now, that fits the concept of creative diplomacy? And if yes, then who is the creative one here, Trump or the North Korean leader?
That's the journalist asking here. Okay. Well, first of all, I don't know whether you have noticed it, and perhaps we are in a process of being humble about it, but one visit by Jeff Feltman to North Korea, UN Under-Secretary General, American, did in a way coincidentally produce some further discussions later. Why? Because I think only a UN, even more so if he was an American, as he was, and highly qualified and very experienced person, was able probably to bring a message from the Secretary General about how In fact, there could be ways without losing faith on either side once you have climbed the tree to come down from the tree without losing faith. The UN is one of the best tools in the world to avoid people to lose faith if they want. We are very creative about it. We organize a committee, a conference, anything you want, as long as you find a way by not having to go all the way up. So I think this is so far a good example of potential creative diplomacy.
So who do you think is more creative, Trump or Kim Jong-un?
Can I wait until we see the first meeting between the two? Yes. Yeah.
This brings me to another interesting question, because we see right now how the right-wing populists are pushing out traditional mainstream media by social media, because they're communicating to their voters directly. So the traditional media no longer plays the role of arbiter, of filter. That is also changing the paradigm how politics works and how politics interacts with traditional media. So now you have potentially Trump who tweets, Kim Jong-un who reads and reacts. Does social media also change the way diplomacy works? I mean, does it oblige diplomacy to become quicker, or maybe could it push it out altogether?
Just the contrary, in my opinion. Because you see, when there is a message by tweet, normally it is short and therefore relatively abrupt, as you know, and or at least very direct, otherwise it can't be. Diplomacy then takes place immediately after explaining, no, look, that tweet that you got, well, let me explain better. He really didn't mean what he actually wanted to tell you something, but I can also elaborate further. So I believe that, on the contrary, now is more than ever required a diplomatic capacity of trying to explain, elaborate, and go further than just tweets to tweets.
So it makes even harder, the diplomatic work now. You have to work harder.
Yes, it does. It does. Correct.
Okay, I would like to take a couple of questions from the audience now. Please present yourself.
Some young people also, please. Yeah.
I mean, I've been told that students want to ask. Sure, the lady in the very back. The girl, the young, beautiful girl in the very back.
I'm not that much young. Hi, actually I'm coming from CERN, so very far away from this in graduating institute. But I would like to ask you a question. What do you think that if, for example, Trump tweets something and in return President Assad answer him directly? What is your impression? Do you believe both of them? Do you trust them? Or you are kindly biased on one of them with the experience that you have? Thank you.
It's one of the biggest challenges for a UN diplomat is to maintain as much as possible its objectivity, neutrality. That's the job of the Secretary General, and which then we all have to follow. The problem is that how do you combine that neutrality, I would say impartiality more than neutrality, from your own need to express the moral authority that the Secretary General is expected to express and the UN Charter. And that's when suddenly you get emotional. If you didn't, you will just be a machine passing on messages. And it is difficult. And there is where probably, I give you an example these days, I mean, it's not easy what we are watching at the moment and seeing, and we cannot stop it. There is a military logic taking over suddenly when we thought there was some type of political process. Now it's military. And so where do you say the rebels are been stopping some people to live because they need them as human shields? The government has been bombing a whole building or several buildings because in that building perhaps there were some rebels. Who is the angel here? And how can you actually then get involved in being completely impartial? And then the compass becomes the people. Anything that we can do to reduce the pain of these people, anything that we can do that allows them to actually, if they want to leave, and those who want to stay, and aid to reach them, and to make it embarrassing, very embarrassing, or unpleasant for those who are actually planning or could be planning to use either the stoppage or the heavy bombing, that would be our parameter, our compass. But difficult. Every day you go through that and you wonder how you can actually maintain your neutrality or impartiality and yet maintain moral authority.
Thank you, Staffan. Can we have one or two more questions, please, at the very end of the audience?
Hi, I'm Mohammed Hamadi. I just arrived to Geneva. I'm Syrian. I'm the coordinator of Syrian NGO Alliance, and I was 10 days ago in Syria. So
where in Syria?
In Idlib, where my family is there. So my question for you is, listening to the creativity as a tool for international diplomacy, aren't we greatly failing in Syria, where we cannot stop the attacks against civilians, the wiping out of entire cities? Could we consider that a real creativity ways to find solutions for the Syrians? Thank you.
First of all, I understand your feeling because I have the same feeling, and I was talking to the Secretary General the other day. We had the same feeling. The feeling of is the international community, due to the paralysis of the Security Council, except very few cases, or the international moral community. We used to be outraged by the fact that there was civilians being hit. By the way, I joined the UN because I saw a child being hit in Cyprus when I was 17. That made me outraged. And now, ambulances, hospitals, twice hit, schools, and frankly, let's be honest, even civilians in Damascus by mortar shelling in the middle of the center. No rules anymore. Syria has become the worst example of completely forgetting all what we thought were some rules, chemical weapons, bombing, all sorts. So from that point of view, the answer is yes. The UN, the international community, when I say the UN, I mean Security Council, because if they decided we would be ready and able to do whatever, humanitarian convoys, negotiations until midnight in order to get something moving, new elections. So in that sense, the answer is yes. So far, the international community and the UN Security Council has failed. And has failed Syria and the Syrian people. Kofi Annan said it, Lakhdar Brahimi said it, Secretary General is saying it. But that doesn't mean that we should just give up. That's what I'm saying. Because of you, by the way. The Syrian women, the people who say we are not giving up in Idlib or anywhere, we are not giving up on our country.
Let's have one more question, please. Yes, and then we'll continue with the panel. No, actually, right here.
There you go. Yes. Thank you very much. Okay, yeah, I'll just say that.
It would not be bad if, it would not be bad if you introduce yourself, so I can visualize a little bit.
Definitely, Your Excellency. My name is Mats Fritzberger, a Young Leaders Fellow from the Geneva Center for Security Policy. Your wonderful anecdote about Juba made me think about the role that the religion and faith might play. Considering the involvement of Mother Teresa. Previously, my impression is at least that it was looked upon in humanitarian and development work if projects had a religious tone to them, whereas I'm increasingly experiencing an acknowledgement, acknowledgement and recognition for the mediating role that religion and faith may play. So Can you elaborate a bit about your thoughts on that? Thank you.
Did I understand well what you said? That should I elaborate on the impact of religion on what we are doing? Is that your question? Okay. Well, the impact is extremely painful because even in this conflict in Syria or in other conflicts recently, there has been a temptation of using religion as a raison d'etre to justify the conflict. One thing that I've been certainly dreaming of, and I don't know whether we will be able to see it. Do you remember the Helsinki Accord? That was a moment when the Cold War ended in a way for other reasons, but ended through also a certain political process. Much of what we are seeing in Iraq, in Syria, in Lebanon, in Yemen, is connectable to the tectonic fight between one country and another, Iran and Saudi Arabia, Sunni and Shia. We cannot hide it. And we get involved in the West or anywhere else because of that. But it is the basis. You could imagine that if one day, and that would be a great diplomatic achievement, and it's not impossible at all, look what can happen, that there would be finally a recognition by these two major countries to actually say, let's sit down. Let's agree at least on where we can go from and to. You would see an impact immediately on Yemen, Lebanon, Syria, and Iraq, and beyond. So religion has an impact, because in this case it's the same religion but with two different connotations.
Well, I'm going to turn you back to my questions, if you don't mind. I know that Syria is a very painful subject. Actually, I've been there a couple of years ago, and my life has never been the same afterwards. But it would be a pity just to talk about that all of hours. So I'm going to ask you more about the tools of creative diplomacy and what it takes. For instance, I wonder if personal contact and chemistry is something that could be a prerequisite. I'm thinking about Lavrov-Kerry case here, because they hammered out Iran deal, which I think is a pretty much diplomatic masterpiece at a time where their countries were literally on the verge of a Cold War. And many would argue that that happened because they had a great personal contact. What do you think? Is it important, or is creative diplomacy just a planned strategy, and it doesn't need luck, it doesn't need events like Marza Teresa showing up at your doorway, or personal chemistry between the people who are negotiating, even if they're ideological enemies?
Sophie, if you look at Sergio was probably one of the most charming, charismatic people we have had in the UN so far. The personal chemistry, personal touch, the human touch is fundamental. And you did use a very good example. I witnessed, in some cases I even facilitated, at the meetings in which Sergei Lavrov and John Kerry were discussing. And it was clear that there were some common interests, and they are, between Russia and the US. For instance, they both are against Daesh, and Daesh is against them. So a very clear common interest. And second, there is a common interest is that they don't believe, and I hope this will continue, that Syria, with all due respect, is worth a war between the two or any conflict between them. So deconfliction. And the three, that there was, and there is a clear uneasiness, in my opinion, by even Russia, vis-à-vis what President Assad has been doing. But they stick to their own ally, and the US was sticking to their own position. But the chemistry made a big difference. Few meters from here, not far away, at the Wilson Hotel, about in April 1 year ago, 2 years ago, when there was a meeting between Sergei Lavrov and John Kerry, which lasted until midnight. I was there. There was a deal. The Syrian Air Force would have been grounded, and the Americans would have done all what they can, and they should have done and could have done, to separate al-Nusra, i.e. Al-Qaeda, from others through their own allies. That deal was based on one key factor, factor T, trust, which is always a big problem. They trusted each other, and they trusted they could make an effort, and they want to make an effort, and it was a major missed opportunity. One day I will explain why it didn't work out. It was not because of them, because of other events.
Well, I suppose because often people confuse diplomacy and politics. Those are two different things out there, because politicians make decisions and then diplomats have to execute them. They don't really belong to themselves. They're not the ones setting goals. I can't not ask you about what you think about the current US-Russia relations. I mean, if you were a diplomatic wizard with no magic powers, just diplomatic powers, and you're looking at the things the way you are. You have two huge ethnocentric nations locking horns with an abyss in mentality. None of them willing to compromise, and these are the given facts, and you cannot change them. Where do you see a place for maneuvering there? Is there a place for creative diplomacy, or is it too late now?
I see by far more potential for creative diplomacy and discussions between the US and Russia on Syria than anywhere else. And I don't want to refer to other areas in Europe and elsewhere where there is a clear difference, for the reason I just mentioned. The one is that none of the two want to recognize that in spite of what they've been doing and their presence there, certainly Russia very massively, in the US to a lower degree, Daesh in Raqqa and in Deir ez-Zor has been territorially defeated, but could come back and is still present in some areas. Second, I do believe also that they have a common interest in not being dragged into anything beyond that, because they are talking to each other. And while we are talking, while we are seeing some major declarations, they are talking to each other. And that is, to me, a guarantee that while there are some rhetorics, there is a conversation. The moment that conversation would disappear, we would do all what we can to try to do what we are supposed to do, but it's not disappeared.
Oh, yeah, they're talking. We saw Russia's top spies just visit Washington's top spies, so they're talking. Questions?
A little bit more than that.
Yeah. Questions, please. Yes, please, young man.
Hi, my name is Shadi Zahed. I'm a student at the Graduate Institute, and I'm also half Syrian, by the way, from Homs.
From?
Homs.
Homs.
Okay, so my question is that you said military solution is no longer possible. It's only through politics. But do you actually think that the regime is even willing to consider any political transition to step down? Because from what I see, the regime is gaining territory day by day, and within 2 years they'll probably crush the revolution, while the international community is just standing there. And then a guy who has committed every single crime against humanity would just be back in power, and then would be like, oops, that's it. So, I mean, is it actually still possible for politics to take a role? Thank you.
Well, I understand why you're feeling that. Sometimes at night I have the same doubt. But let me tell you what I believe. And I think I refer to it. I believe that territorial gains through military means, which are taking place, are not going to be sustainable without a political formula. I give you an example. A lot of Syria has been destroyed. There is a need of $352 billion for making that country back more or less where it was. It was not destroyed, by the way, by Al-Qaeda because they don't have airplanes, to my knowledge, or helicopters. So that reconstruction needs to come from somewhere. It can only come from World Bank or EU. I don't believe, from what I heard so far, that neither the World Bank or the EU will be getting involved in the reconstruction of Syria unless there is a political process, which means new constitution and elections under UN supervision and sharing power. If that was not taking place, I believe that what you are defining would be a Pyrrhic victory. And that is not sustainable. But let's talk about it in 1 year time, God willing. Okay.
Anyone else? Please, young girl with a computer. Microphone is coming.
Thank you. My name is Artemis. I'm 17. I'm a student. And my question is about Syria. And what do you think that young people can do to make a change to the situation in Syria, given that there is international paralysis and there is no longer outrage when civilians are being hit?
Exactly what you said. You see, I just want to refer to, perhaps again, forgive me, a personal. I was 17 and my father suggested I should go on a mission to Cyprus with Welfare Program at the time in Rome and go to Cyprus accompanying a UN mission. And I was 17 and I saw in front of my eyes a child of 8 years, 9 years, shot by a sniper. That child was playing football on the so-called green line, or blue line, green line is called, yeah. And I was asking myself, come on, I can't believe it. I never seen even my grandfather dying or anyone dying, and certainly not killed. And this child died in front of my eyes, where big guys with big mustaches who look more or less the same, drink the same coffee, they call it Greek or Turkish, but it's the same more or less, and are actually shooting at children on one side or the other. And I got a level of huge outrage, in my opinion, healthy outrage. And frankly, decided to dedicate my life to UN emergency operations, not in preparing a report, but actually being there. I'm seeing this missing at the moment. I was reading the other day a report saying that there is a certain type of catastrophe numbness. In other words, too horrific is this horror of the Syrian war that people are not protesting. Young people are not in the street with a panel saying, let's get the evacuation of Eastern Ghouta in a human way. Let's get Afrin people being accompanied by the UN while they're living. Let's protest. I'm not seeing that anymore. So this is worrisome, because that means we are getting anesthetized. And the only way to avoid that is seeing the picture, but even the pictures. The child that we saw on the shore of one Greek island and the child which was seen in Aleppo produced an effect, the first time of 1 month, the other one of 2 days. And now I don't want to show the pictures we have seen of children in Eastern Ghouta. So what I would like you young people to feel and show polite, determined outrage.
One more question. Young man with a beard.
Thank you. My name is Alessandro, and I'm a junior program officer at the Geneva Center for Security Policy here in Maison de la Paix. I am also very much scared by President Trump, but not by his tweets, but rather by his decision to launch randomly 59 missiles on Syria one day, some months ago. That's something that was called in the past unilateral use of force, but today is rather, I would say, random use of force. However, I was really wondering, as a former LLM student here at that time, whether, and that this is my question to you, do you believe that in Syria we could envisage a form of diplomacy backed by force? Meaning, whether you think that this very complex or super complex environment in which you are working has some similarities with a former example that we know from some decades ago, that's former Yugoslavia, where basically diplomacy backed by force worked. So do you believe in a solution like that? And do you believe that there are the political circumstances, the political conditions to go that way? Thank you.
I don't think so at the moment. Otherwise, we would have seen it earlier. And I think that there is no willingness by any country to get involved militarily inside Syria in a proactive way. Except Russia, which is there to defend the government, and others who are there for other reasons, but not necessarily to find a final solution. I mean, I'll give you an example. There are some 3-4 areas which are like buffer areas, which are meant to basically be what they are, buffer areas, but not necessarily aimed at changing the political outlook in Syria. That was a slogan that took place for 3-4 years, but now no one means that. And therefore, I don't see that happening. My hope is that there will be sufficient pressure anyway, not military pressure, but pressure, to make sure that there is no belief by anyone that a pure military outcome is sustainable in Syria. President Trump has indicated his own 3 priorities. He said it openly. One is definitely interfering with the Iranian influence in Syria. The other one is liberating Raqqa from Daesh. And the third one is concerned about Israel, the danger of being affected by the Hezbollah. These are the 3 main priorities. But he has also mentioned that he does not want to see an escalation on the humanitarian side, although we are seeing it at the moment, and that there should be a political solution inclusive, which is our UN resolution. I will stop there.
You know, I wanted to ask you whether talking to terrorists should be part of creative diplomacy, because obviously Sergio talked to everyone, even to the guys that the world considered bad guys. And I remember Kofi Annan said that terrorists are a reality, you have to deal with them to bring peace. Then you have a lot of heads of states who have this we don't negotiate with terrorists approach. So what do you think? Should some moral or ethical boundaries be crossed for the sake of peace? And if yes, then should there be a differentiation between good terrorists, bad terrorists, my terrorists, your terrorists, or if we say that we are talking to terrorists for the sake of diplomacy and peace, then we're talking to all terrorists?
First of all, in Syria, the terrorists are only, as far as the UN is concerned, those which are identified by the UN Security Council resolution. And they are very clearly identified by name. But you could see even 2401, this UN Security Council resolution, which was unanimous, by the way, but with caveats, which was about asking ceasefire, except terrorists. And then you had almost a menu à la carte of who you consider a terrorist. And that was a loophole that we are paying for at the moment in Syria on the 2401. That's why there was not a total ceasefire at all. Now, so that's regarding definition of terrorist need, in my opinion, to be linked to what the UN decides or agrees upon. Otherwise, we fall into you choose your own terrorist. Now, should the UN Secretariat, talk to terrorists? Well, I said it, and Sergio was doing it. We should not refuse to talk to anyone at all. One, because if they happen to control people, example, we had it in Sudan or elsewhere, or in Syria, and the territory is controlled by them, and the people are in it, are we going not to talk to them about how to get a convoy of food or medicines or vaccines in order to reach those people? That doesn't mean we recognize them. That doesn't mean we give them legitimacy, but we do talk to them. If the UN started selecting to whom they talk, then one of the strongest strengths of the UN, legitimacy, moral authority when we exercise it, and we are always able to talk to everyone, and everyone should be feeling ready to talk to us.
So you feel it should be part of creative diplomacy? Because, I mean, Arafat was considered a terrorist until people started talking to him, right? You start talking to terrorists and then they stop being terrorists.
Correct, but I watched, I was then a young UN staff member, watching Arafat having interesting meetings, not in public, with all sorts of people. So, bottom line, you have open, public, acknowledged recognition and meetings. Diplomacy is quite discreet, and it should be discreet.
So tell me something, is there a red line, well, since we're all talking about Syria right now, because so many atrocities have taken place on all sides, is there a red line after which even creative diplomacy doesn't work? Because it's easy to talk about creative diplomacy and all the tools, but when so much blood is spilled and heads are being chopped off, is there a place where it just doesn't work anymore?
Okay, then we change terminology, okay? Because you're right. If you look at creative diplomacy as a technique, in other words, a form, then there is a limit after which you have to acknowledge it's not going well. So let me change it with creative determination. And then we never give up on that.
I wanted to ask you a question about Syria as well. I think right now, for someone who's not Syrian, the most interesting question is to figure out whether there is a chance of the country staying integrally. Because Balkans come to my mind, people living together in one cultural space, civil war, brothers killing each other, and then geography tells you have to live with your enemy, but you can't create that cultural space anymore. What do you think are the chances of Syria staying integral?
How many colors do you see here?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
That's the X-ray today of Syria. Not a good one. This is fragmentation. This is, in fact, a country which has areas under influence of different other countries. This is not sustainable, and that's why, in spite of all what we are aiming at, there is a fundamental principle, the integrity and unity of the country. Otherwise, each of these countries who have an influence will have to babysit an area of their own influence. The borders will be moving constantly. Nightmare. For the Syrians and for those who want to maintain their own fragmented environment. So I believe at the end of the day, Syria will and has to remain unified. Let me refer to two examples. I remember when I was in Afghanistan at a certain point, and then in Iraq before, there was some very educated and bright professor who came up with the idea, well, in Iraq, come on, the south is Basra, Shia. The center is a combination with, the capital where everybody is. Then you have the Sunni Anbar area, and then you have the Kurdish area. Why don't we just recognize they are separated? And we will find a formula so that no one will be complaining with each other. That would have been Pandora box. And luckily, the Iraqis, in spite of those divisions, God knows if the Kurds in the north and the people you see in Basra are not different in way they actually behave, dress, and everything else, but integrity. Same applies to Afghanistan. There was a moment, the north and the south, the Pashtun, and so on. And the country is still united. If we start playing with that, this type of fragmentation becoming from temporary permanent is Pandora box.
All right, questions? Please, sir.
John McCarthy from Australia, Your Excellency. In relation to the issues you've just dealt with,
Sorry?
In relation to the issues you've just been referring to, which is the dissolution of Syria, could you specify whether there are any major powers concerned with Syria that you're aware of that are in actual fact committed to the dissolution of the Republic, that in actual fact there are on one or other side major players, that is those who are involved, who do want to bring about the dissolution of Syria, because much of the world is certainly not of that impression. The second thing, Your Excellency, is to ask you this. This has been described as the greatest man-made disaster of our generation. The blood that is involved in this is on all our hands. The Pope has said that if he was given a grace to have one solution to one problem in the world, it would be to ask as to how Syria would be solved, as to be given the solution to the Syrian problem. He also says that there has been a massive decline in interest in the West, in general public opinion and otherwise, in this particular issue, and that there should be ways in which that was brought about to be revived as being a part of putting pressure or bringing pressure to bring about a solution. Do you see the decline of public opinion in the West as being a part of the problem that should be overcome to try and get a solution to this?
Thank you, Ambassador. Well, regarding the first question, the answer is no. I don't see any country having a genuine interest in the fragmentation of Syria, fragmentation, and keeping it that. And that, I think, is good news, because at least there is a common position. Secondly, I think they're all aware of the famous Colin Powell motto, you break it, you own it. And at a certain point, you then, if you're a broken part and you own that part, you better take care of it, rebuild it, security, arrangements. You are in the middle of nowhere, far away from you, and so on. So this is a positive outcome at the moment, at least a common ground. Regarding His Holiness, I did see the Pope at the General Assembly, actually, when he came for the General Assembly 3 years ago, I think. And he asked to see me in the background of the chamber there of this General Assembly, and he told me 2 words. He asked me, first of all, how is Syria doing? And I said, not well. He said, I'm praying every day. And he confirmed what you said, exactly that. If there was one thing he would like to see. And now, I don't know how many of you, please raise your hands, have been to Syria before the conflict. Very good, very good. Okay, okay. Well, of course. A wonderful country. A mosaicos of religions, culture, traditions coexisting in a fantastic historical, agricultural, natural, perhaps one of the last real Arab countries on top of it. When you went to the souk, it was a real souk, not a touristical one. And the city of Damascus, and Aleppo, and Homs, and so on. So, I understand why he says that, because in a way, this war, if it does not rebuild Syria, we have lost a jewel, which was this type of mosaicos.
Please, questions? Young man in an orange sweater.
Good evening. My name is Maurice Wollensack. I'm a law student in Germany. Excuse me. When I think of diplomacy,
what are you doing here?
Good question. I attend a conference at the ITU. When I think of diplomacy, I think obviously of the United Nations. And when I think of the United Nations, I think of necessary reforms. I was wondering if you have a creative approach to reforming the Security Council, so in order that we can get a solution to the conflict. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, there is a limit to creativity when, when there is no will to change. You know, Security Council is the outcome of a Second World War. And Second World War was a X-ray, a photo Polaroid of that period. But we are in 2018, so no one can deny that it would have been a great idea to revisit how that was established. But since that can be only changed by the Security Council itself, now that looks not immediate, okay? Having said that, there is one area where I think if there was a conscience about it, could be done without revolutionizing the whole setup. Imagine that there was a gentleman-ladies agreement publicly announced, and therefore to be actually questioned if you didn't maintain it, that Security Council members could not use their veto when there is a human right obvious outrage or a clear humanitarian tragedy. That would already make a big difference. So, where are you? Outrage, please. Okay? Outrage. Let's make it here. We need to hear that. That could produce a public opinion movement in that direction, and it doesn't require a revolutionary new approach on how to, who is a member, permanent member or not.
So I've been listening to you, all this panel, and I can't stop wondering, what is better, to be a foreign minister of a country where you answer to a national interest, to a president, because you don't have a president. I mean, your boss is the Security Council, right?
Well, I've got three bosses. Secretary General, Security Council, and God.
God.
Not in that
yes,
order.
But you don't answer one national interest.
No.
So you're an international broker. Are you freer in creativity and diplomacy like that, or the very needed UN reform is holding you back? Which one is better? I can't figure out. To be a foreign minister of a country or to be a UN diplomat?
I would have no doubt about the fact of being a UN diplomat. That's why I did return then to UN after that period as Deputy Foreign Minister. Because the mandate is wonderful, it's the Charter. So if you are able to follow that one, you are fighting for human rights. You are trying to interfere with people being killed. You're trying to find a solution between people who hate each other. You're not trying to push for the interest of your country, or trying to make sure that there can be a better market for it. With all due respect, of course, to every country, but between the two, I have no doubt.
So we only have a couple of minutes left until the end of this panel, so maybe one or two more questions. Oh, wow. Yes, young man in a blue sweater.
Thank you, Mr. I'm sorry.
What is your name?
Nicholas from Geneva. Here, I'm a high school student. You spoke about the kind of lack of outrage anymore. Like there's no the outrage which should exist. And when you look at the media coverage of the situation in Syria nowadays, it still is present, right? But what happens, and I can see it from my generation, from the people in my school and so on. You see those news feeds on your Facebook profile and whatever, and people don't pay attention anymore. Do you believe that, and if yes, do you believe that kind of the media does not pass the message well, because messages are passed by the media? And if yes, what would be a creative way to change this situation? How could this message of and just revigorating the outrage which should exist, what is a creative way to do this?
Thank you. Thank you for raising this point, because it is very important, especially now after 7 years. We are entering 8th year. There was a study done by, I think, the BBC that about the so-called numbness approach. In other words, why people at a certain point, when you see and you start having statistics instead of human beings, and they say, oh, 50,000 dead, no, 400,000, no, 1 million wounded, and it sounds like a figure. And people are getting a fatigue on that. Apparently there is a part in the brain of the human beings, and I think it may be true, that long, prolonged, bad catastrophe, sadness, we react by trying to put it aside. But I would like to subtly play a different role here. Tom, a journalist I respect a lot, please take the microphone and please reply to that question.
Wow. Hello, my name is Tom Miles. I'm a journalist from Reuters news agency here. This is a little surreal. I've never had the tables turned on me like this. I think after this I should get to ask you a question, but no, I'm not a student. The truth is you've raised a very good question. And we've been here, I work for Reuters news agency. We're an organization that has a bureau here in Geneva. And we've been covering this conflict and the diplomacy year in, year out, trying to keep this alive and keep it on the front page. But you're absolutely right. There is a numbness that sets in, and it's very difficult to tell the same old story in new ways. God, I wish I had an answer to the question, but I really don't. I mean, the outrage with Aylan Kurdi was there when there was a picture of him on the beach, and then again with the child whose name I've forgotten in Aleppo. But you're absolutely right. The public interest slowly drains away and other things take over. So it's very, very hard. Aleppo was a huge crisis. We see it again in Eastern Ghouta. I think the level of interest in Eastern Ghouta is even less than it was in Aleppo. Even though it's huge, it's less now. And it's terrible. So, I don't know. I mean, we are always thinking of ways to get our news on the front page because we want people to read our stories. But, it's hard to sell it. Trying to think of a good answer, but you caught me on the hop. I feel like this is payback after years of hounding you. Yes. Damn.
Thank you, Tom. We have time for one more question. Let's take a lady or young girl, actually, the very back with a white shirt, and that will be our final question.
Hi, my name is Laura. I'm a first-year student, master's student here, but I'm also interning with the UN. My question is, you're talking about the numbness of the public and the fact that we're desensitized to this, but at the same time, what part of the UN can react to this? Interning in the Human Rights Council, we see this every day. By the time the high-level segment is over, by the time permanent members speak, by the time observer states speak, and it's time for National Human Rights Association to take the floor, and we have 120 of them speaking on every day on issues across the world. Delegations leave the room. We have states in the human rights saying, what is the point of the new emergency resolution on Syria in the human rights if the one in the Security Council is not abided? So I'm just wondering if the states themselves, and the UN is the states themselves, lose hope, what part of the UN can still react or be efficient in any way in these situations? Thank you.
The answer is Ali, and Stephanie, Rana, and many others who, while we are talking, are actually guiding a convoy inside Eastern Ghouta, who are, while we are talking, have been last night trying to facilitate a meeting between Russians and Jaish Islam, those who are ready to bring a convoy, in spite of everything, into Afrin, now that we see people moving out. That is the type of answer that the UN can go and give when meetings, conferences, and UN resolutions appear to be futile. So I would like to pay respect, and he was one of them. He, like me and many others, wanted to be in the field because it's where the UN can show the difference. The UN Secretariat, the UNICEF, the WFP, the peacekeepers, the monitors, the observers. That's my answer. Otherwise, I would have given up myself too if I didn't see that. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you for this wonderful lecture, for this panel. I think we should all thank His Excellency, Mr. de Mistura. Thank you everyone who made this possible. And that's it for today.
I will be short. Dear Mr. de Mistura, thank you very much for this inspiring lecture and sharing your experiences with us tonight. You probably know this quote from Henri Matisse, the famous French painter. He used to say, creativity takes courage. I think you've shown us great examples tonight. It indeed takes a lot of courage to think outside the box. And we hope your example will inspire others, maybe future diplomats, to challenge the status quo and follow your path. Thank you. Mrs. Chevanatze, thank you very much for your kind words and moderating the debate and the Q&A. Thank you. A big thank you also for Anna Willem, the board members of the foundation and the Graduate Institute for making this lecture happen tonight. Thank you. Last but not least, thank you all for attending the event, and we hope to see you again next year. Good evening.